I gotta tell you this story. This is like one of those dumb things you do as a kid. It's like a Platoon where like Charlie Sheen is sitting in the forest and he's raining and he's sitting over there.
Oh yes,
right. So
yes.
the guard unit I was at was in Western Pennsylvania, and I don't know, it was in the fall or something, and we're going out to the field for the weekend. We're packing stuff up with the old rucksacks and those old big, heavy, gnarly sleeping bags that if they got wet was like 100 pounds, and I'm thinking, I don't need a sleeping bag, man. I'm living like this war movie in my head, like Charlie Sheen. Man, we get out there, I was freezing my ass off. Like I am the dumbest son of a bitch on the planet. Because all I had was like my poncho. I didn't even have a poncho liner. So it's freezing. I finally get into the God, when you join, like in the late 90s, they still have those old rubber mop boots.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I finally got in like all my mop gear, wetsuit, and like rolled up in a cigar in my poncho and just prayed for the daylight. I was like, okay, this clearly you're no longer in a movie. And then so anyway, I always laugh at myself for being a dumbass of like following the movies too close. And then I got commissioned in '97 out of West Virginia, and then went to the 101st first, and then kind of
as an infantry officer, right?
Yeah, as an infantry officer.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett. You guys are all very familiar with me. And today I brought in one of those officers, one of those dirty, nasty officers, but one that I truly respect, one that I admire, one of those guys that if you're lining up people on the wall like it's dodgeball, but instead of dodgeball, you're going to combat and you got to pick your company commander, I'm probably picking this guy to take with me because he was my commander at 175. Great guy. I would call him a killer. When it comes to the combat space, I would follow him into anything. Super honored to have him on the show today. Dave Taylor. I'm going to quit taking over the mic. I'm going to pass it to you to introduce yourself and we're going to get on with this conversation.
Awesome. Well, first of all, you might have a hard time looking at that San Francisco hat because you crushed my Cowboys early this year really bad. Of course, the Cowboys stressed me out again last night against the Seahawks. That's one of those I was torn because I'm a Geno Smith fan because he went to West Virginia.
Right.
He's playing against the Cowboys, and I can't do that.
Yep. I didn't do this on purpose or anything.
Yeah, I know. I'll look past you. Don't worry. I'll just look over you. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. It really is an honor. But to serve with you, to watch what you've been doing since you've left the military, and your kind words. I mean, those things to me, that means more than anything else hearing that stuff from you. And I do appreciate it. First, I guess I'd say, I'm a dad first. So I've got two kids. My son is at West Virginia. And my daughter's at Duquesne University up in Pittsburgh. She likes the Cowboys. She's not becoming a complete traitor. She likes the Penguins. I'm like, you can have hockey, but don't ever leave me in the Cowboys. Otherwise, we're going to have problems, sweetheart. So, they might be in college, but I think as many of, because I've seen it, our kids are our priority. A lot of us make decisions around what we're going to do in life because of our kids. I'm from Annapolis, Maryland. So, yep, I grew up right outside the Naval Academy and wisely chose the Army. And people always ask why. And I'm like, well, I had no desire to be on a ship for like 6 months. And I had no desire to wear like these white uniforms the entire time. So that's where I'm currently at. Like once my kids, kind of both get out of college, I don't know where I'm going to end up because I love the mountains. That's where I'm like the most happy. So I'm constantly looking at how can I get west and do some mountain climbing. And I'm looking forward to being here. I mean, I've got to me, it's just like a different, we got ebbs and flows in life from where we were as a kid to our military time, to transition to where we're at. And, we look back and see like how things have evolved over life. And it's interesting. I think I'm far more self-reflective and self-aware now than I certainly was when I was a young kid. But I really appreciate being here. You might find some things out that you did not know.
Good.
Did you did not know when we were running and gunning back in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love when I have you guys on here and you introduce yourself. You guys are so humble and never go into great detail, which is hard for me as a podcast host, but I appreciate just the type of people we are. But we're going to kick it out. We're going to dig into everything that you said. We're going to pull it all out of you. But we got to start the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. The question of the day is, what's Dave Taylor's definition of vulnerability?
Yeah, it's such a good one. And one, if you'd asked me when I was younger, I probably would have just given you some random garbage answer, right? And, of course, I know we're not specifically talking about like physical vulnerability here, while that certainly is one. The way I think about vulnerability now is really more centered around like emotional vulnerability, like the willingness to let the armor, the shield down that at least I had for the majority of my life, particularly in the early years, whether it stems from being a product of a divorced family, then you feel like you got to be stronger than you are, then you join the military, and then you definitely feel like at least I did. I don't hate to generalize because not everybody probably feels like this, but I certainly felt like you have to have this constant show of strength. Yep. Right. Because if you didn't have this show of strength, it was like a show of weakness, which now I laugh at it. I actually think it's the complete opposite. And I think really the vulnerability is for someone to show strength by being okay, like not having all the answers, like being okay to share your thoughts with working with people that, you may work with folks that are like smarter than you, and you probably will, but being vulnerability to say, okay, look, I don't know this. Like being able to really, I think, like look yourself in the mirror and be vulnerable with yourself in addition to others. And I sometimes think it's harder to be vulnerable with yourself because a lot of us, it's easy sometimes for us to point the finger outward. And I think, the moment we start being, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with ourselves, I think it makes a difference. I mean, I personally think that's what, me looking at myself and being vulnerable to Susan, which you probably remember Susan. For those who don't, Susan and I were married for 13 years, and we've been divorced now, I don't know, like 10, 11 years. I'm not really sure. It's been a long time. But it took a lot of vulnerability for us to get to the point now where we're, spending Thanksgiving and Christmas together with her husband and the kids. And, I consider her a friend now, but I think you got to have an emotional vulnerability. And that's something I certainly did not have earlier in my life. And I think when we talk vulnerability, that's what I think more of now, in the sense of, hey, can we be emotionally vulnerable, and can we actually be willing to say we don't know something, be comfortable with it? And I think that actually shows more strength than it does feeling like you have to have all the answers, or this, kind of facade on the outside, but in the inside, it kind of eats you up. Because I think that just eventually boils over, and at a certain point will just explode on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything that you said there. And it's a hard thing to define, I think, really. That's why I asked the question. It can mean something different from a leadership role. It can mean something different as a parent. It can mean something different in a situation. I think you're right. But I'm going to say the biggest thing for me is the I don't know, right? Being able to say I don't have the answer was probably one of the hardest things for me as a leader, but the people that came to me and helped me out once I said that, I mean, that's where I learned and I grew from that. Right. I wish I'd have said that shit sooner in my life, is what I really wish.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I wish I'd have done the same thing. Unfortunately, we had a lot of good folks around that could probably like hide our gaps or our weaknesses, because that's just the environment. But I have found, even now in my post-military life, I mean, guys I work with are 12, 13 years younger than me, partners, but they've run these businesses. But it's getting comfortable saying, okay, look, I don't know this because I didn't grow up in a business sense. You all have grown this. Like, just help me out. Like, give me a hand. And being okay with that, right, I think takes a different level of self-awareness that I did not have. Doesn't mean I'm always comfortable with it now. I still don't like it. I think generally right. we like to feel like we know stuff.
Yep.
But it's almost like, how much time do you spend beating yourself up trying to come up with an answer versus just saying, hey, like, I don't know this. Just help me out if you would.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great way to start off this podcast and this conversation. So let's jump with Bill and Ted and go back in the Wayback Machine. And what led you to the Army? I know you're from Annapolis, but what was kind of your path into the military, into the Army? And what year was that?
1992 is when I first enlisted into the Army, which, some people may know, some may not. So, I mean, it was the be all you can be, right? Like, I'm not going to sing it for you, but it was those commercials, right? It was those commercials that really struck me. And I think if you ask my mother, she would tell you from probably the time I was 11, I was running around, with this like M16 BB gun, shooting up things and maybe some animals in the backyard, shooting neighbor houses, shooting our own house. And when Well, my sister watches this. She'll probably drop somewhere in there that I was shooting her with the BB gun. But like you, in fairness, I gave her like a puffy jacket, and I believe
Oh,
if I used a pellet, if I used pellets, because it was a flatter thing, it just wouldn't
yeah,
hurt.
yeah,
It just
yeah,
wouldn't
yeah,
hurt as much.
yeah. You were assessing risk early.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
I might have given her some glasses or something. I don't know. I thought I was helping her out quite a bit.
right, right.
That's not how she'll say it, but I was always drawn to serving in the army. I was infatuated with the Vietnam War for whatever reason. Where a lot of folks, study like World War I, World War II. Something about the Vietnam War. I have an uncle who served. I have another uncle who was killed in action. James Taylor. I mean, he was 18 years
Oh,
old
wow.
when he was killed. It was I don't know, crazy, but I actually found he has a son. I finally tracked his son down this past year and got in contact with his son that I knew was out there, but never got to meet. So it was always something like the serving something bigger than oneself, and then of course the altruism, and of course I'm watching Platoon, Rambo,
Yeah.
Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill, the Tour of Duty TV show. I enlisted out of high school in the Maryland Army Reserve as a military policeman. So I don't tell people that too often. I kept that one
Down low.
Yeah, I kept that one on the down low for quite some time because my parents would not sign. They're like, hey, look, we want you to go to college, so we'll let you join the reserves, and then go to college, and then do whatever you want to do. If you want to enlist after that, do whatever. So I went down. There I am going down to Fort Anniston, Alabama, wondering, a couple of days later, like wondering what in the hell I did. I was like, what in the hell did I get myself into? Right? This is not like the movies, right? This is not like the movies. So I went in, got back to Maryland afterwards. I went to community college for a year. Then I always wanted to go to West Virginia University. Went up there, and I thought for the longest time I was just going to pursue athletic training, which is what I was studying in school. And I was down in Gold's Gym my senior year, and I always kept a short haircut. So even though I love 80s rock, I never had a mullet, so it wasn't business in the front, party in the back. And then a Captain Doug Floor was in Gold's Gym and saw my haircut and struck up a conversation with me. And then he basically recruited me into ROTC at West Virginia. So I spent 2 years, so my senior year in college there, and then I did 1 year of grad school, which basically meant I was just taking enough courses to get through ROTC, and then got commissioned prior to that, when I went to West Virginia, I joined the Pennsylvania Army National Guard as in an infantry unit. Oh. Right. So I finally felt like, I kind of did the 11 Bravo transition. And I got to tell you this story. This is like one of those dumb things you do as a kid. It's like, in Platoon where like Charlie Sheen is sitting in the forest and he's raining and he's sitting over there.
Oh, yes.
Right. So
yes.
The guard unit I was at was in Western Pennsylvania. And I don't know, it was in the fall or something. And we're going out to the field for the weekend. We're packing stuff up with the old rucksacks and those old, big, heavy, gnarly sleeping bags that, if they got wet was like 100 pounds. And I'm thinking, I don't need a sleeping bag, man. I'm living like this war movie in my head, like Charlie Sheen. Man, we get out there. I was freezing my ass off. Like I am the dumbest son of a bitch on the planet. Because all I had was like my poncho. I didn't even have a poncho liner. So it's freezing. I finally get into the God, when you join, like in the late 90s, they still have those old rubber mop boots.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I finally got in like all my mop gear, wetsuit, and like rolled up in a cigar in my poncho and just prayed for the daylight. I was like, okay, this clearly you're no longer in a movie. And then so anyway, I always laugh at myself for being a dumbass of like following the movies too close. And then I got commissioned in '97 out of West Virginia, and then went to the 101st first, and then kind of
as an infantry officer, right?
Yeah, as an infantry officer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you didn't become an MP.
Love the troops for the troops.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason I didn't tell you all that back in the day.
Yeah, smart. That was very.
I'm pretty sure you all would not have let me live that down ever.
No, we definitely would not have. There would have been a lot of stuff going on with that.
Yeah, a lot of birthdays.
Yeah. So you said your first duty station was with the 101st. What year was that?
90. So I went to Ranger School 97. So I got there the end of 98 and then was with the Rocket Sun. So 1st Battalion, 187
Yeah.
Infantry
Yeah.
down in Fort Campbell for, I mean, only think 16, 17 months, whatever the minimum time frame you had to serve there before you could put a packet in to go to the Ranger Regiment. So
Yeah.
I was there and I kind of knew, like, I always kind of knew I wanted to go to the Ranger Regiment. Same thing, those little trifold brochures that the Army used to give out. It was Rangers, Special Forces.
Yeah.
And I was always drawn to wanting to go to the Ranger Regiment.
Yeah. So great segue. You're professional. So you're there. You start your career. Assess for the 75th Ranger Regiment. What was it that was it? Just you wanted to be with the best? The recruiting mechanism. Post 9/11 was that's where you went to get into the game, right? What was it kind of like back then, pre 9/11? Why did guys go to the 75th? And what's your 75th story?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was because it was the best, right? I mean, you knew SF was out there. That was semi appealing to me until like we went to Botswana and I saw an A-team out in the middle of the desert, and I was like, yeah, I have no desire to ever do this in my life.
Right.
But it was a desire to just be with the best. It's like you knew that's where, if you wanted to be the best in the infantry, you wanted to be a Ranger, and that's where I wanted to go. And it's funny, as I was thinking about this, telling you beforehand, there was so much I just kind of compartmentalized throughout that time frame. And I was like, all right, well, how do we even think about that, right? And it's like I broke it down because I was fortunate to go to 3rd Battalion, 1st Battalion, and 2nd Battalion. So I can kind of equally talk trash about all of them, which is always fun because they're all uniquely different. But, pre 9/11, it was pretty amazing. And I mean, even pre and post, but just seeing then the transition of the Ranger Regiment from pre 9/11 to post 9/11, and the guys we served with were awesome. I mean, I remember getting a 375 and being scared shitless. I was like, man, I'm just some brand new lieutenant, and you got all these Ranger non-commissioned officers that have been there for years, and you kind of hear all these stories going in on like, they're going to eat you up, chew you up, and it was awesome time. I had a lot of good memories in 3rd Battalion. Like, I mean, it's funny that like even things like you couldn't get away with at the time of Kevin Martin was one of our first sergeants. And if I tell you, hey, I had a lot of birthdays, that meant I was getting rolled up a lot, right?
Yep.
And I remember specifically, because there's no way you could get away with this. Now he comes down the hallway, the old 3rd Battalion barracks, and he's like, "Hey, sir, the commander wants to see you," which was Bill Butler. He's like, "Hey, he wants to come see you." So I'm like, "All right." So, and we're at our little platoon bay is like all the way at the end. I get out and I start walking down the hallway, and there's nobody in the hallway. Right? Nobody. It's like that. It's like what we now refer to as like, okay, an ambush is about to happen.
Yeah. The hairs on the back of the neck are starting to stand up.
Well, I get like halfway down, the boys just ball me up, zip tie me, pull my pants down below my ass, put boot polish on my ass, carry me into the CO's office, lays me on the couch until he shows up like 30 minutes later. Now I think it's funny, but could you imagine that? Yeah. But it was great, man. I mean, we had so many good leaders at 3rd Battalion. There was guys like Dan Allen, General Dan Allen that were there, and a lot of different folks that I was able to pull like leadership lessons that they had. So when I eventually took battalion command, I was like, I remember.
Yeah.
I remember when Craig Nixon changed it might have been a 30-mile foot march or 20 or whatever it was. He like changed it specifically so that we could all be home to go watch the college national football championship game.
Yeah.
And, I did that later in life. I was like, oh, that was just like, you remember those like little things like, hey, I'm going to give the boys a chance to go enjoy, certain things or have a day off after the Super Bowl. So that was kind of the 3rd Battalion time right before September 11th happened.
Yeah. That the pre 9/11 75th was a different animal for sure. I think it definitely doesn't happen now, and there's a lot more stories like yours. So When you coming from the conventional army, what was the biggest thing you saw the difference when you got to the 75th? Because I always, and I'm not bashing conventional. I've met some great leaders in the conventional army, leaders that were way better than me, that never
Mhm.
touched foot to the 75th. Uh, but as a collection of leaders, I think that's where the 75th kind of takes step. That's where they step above. What was your kind of thoughts coming into it?
That's exactly right. It's just the general caliber, right? Like the general caliber. And I tell this story to folks sometimes when I'm out speaking. I don't bring a lot of like military analogies over, but when we start talking about like this standard, I was like, there's an army standard, and then everybody in the army has the standard. I would say the main difference that I saw, because I jumped back and forth, is in the regiment the standard was always met and or exceeded, and if you didn't meet it, you were gone. I mean, it was very simple. Of you meet the standard, you don't meet the standard,
Yeah.
then you're gone. And the caliber of individuals and Rangers was just phenomenal on a consistent basis, right? For like a 1-to-1 basis. Because as you said, I've worked with some amazing NCOs and officers outside the Ranger Regiment. But if you take the totality of it,
Yeah.
everybody wants to be there because everybody knows it's like an assessment and selection, like every single day, right? Somebody is going to be there to take your job if you don't perform. And just this simple competency level was what was always what stuck with me, and that was like kind of the driver. Like, hey, I want to be around. I want to be around these guys as long as I can be around these guys. The mission is great. The people are great. Everybody's got this A-type personality, the creativity, the drive and desire to be excellent all the time.
Yeah.
It was really something that I thought was just amazing. I mean, I've reflected a lot since we started talking, and you just think back about, man, like there are just some damn good Americans that we got to serve with that are just truly great people, man. It really is when you just think about like those that make the call to hold the line.
Yeah.
It's really, really phenomenal. So, I mean, that was really kind of what stuck with me, was just the caliber, the fitness level. I mean, everything, right? Like you show up and like, oh, we're going to run this platoon leader into the ground to see if he can hang.
Yeah.
That's when, again, regiment was about running before it came about, how much we can lift and how big we can possibly get.
Yeah. I think it's, same for me as, when I went through RIP back in the day when it was RIP and they told you, you got to have to earn your scroll every day. I didn't know what that meant until I got there. And I realized like, if you don't show up a game every day, you're going to fall off. You're going to fall off of this train. And that's what I really noticed about the 75th is how it just it kept me accountable every day, and I think it still does that. So you got to see the 75th evolve post, pre 9/11, post 9/11.
Yeah.
I always say the thing that surprised me the most, because I'm a pre 9/11 guy by a little bit, is the speed in which the 75th solved problems. After that first rotation where we were getting our feet under us and figuring out what the hell we were going to do in the war, we just the speed at which the 75th evolved in all aspects was, I mean, if I look back on it, it's kind of shocking. What were your kind of takeaways as a platoon leader to company commander in the 75th?
Man, you're absolutely right. That's the first thought I had, was just like the speed in which, if I look at like when, let's see, so I guess I left. Yeah, I went to school in like 2001, right before the towers hit, right? So Rangers jumped in on my birthday, and I was like, I'm going to miss. That's it. I missed the Super Bowl, right? Little did I know.
Yeah.
I was like, that's it. I missed it. I was pissed. From that point to, when I got back to 175, and I guess it was 04, 03, I can't remember. I think it was 04. I think it was 04. Might have been late 03, early 4. I mean, just just like how quickly things evolved. And you nailed it. It's like just the impressive nature, because, regiment always, or maybe still does, I don't know, had this perception of like very rigid and structured, and it's certain, like, you're going to do this and that's it. You can't really, you're not thinking outside of certain things. But then when you look back and you look at like how quickly the regiment evolved into the fighting force, I think it says a lot about the regiment. And it also says just a ton about all the Rangers ahead of that time that laid the foundation and the groundwork, right? To get it to the point where when that switch had to be made, it was made really, really quick. And just the adaptability. I mean, it almost happened so fast you couldn't even really think about it, right? Because you were adjusting so quickly to whatever the emerging threat or need was that you're like, okay, yeah, let's just execute. It really was pretty wild to think back on.
When I think back on it, so the pre 9/11 doctor, like everybody knew doctrine, like there were NCOs that could spit, verbatim lines from 7-8.
Yeah, like carry that in your pocket.
And that the level of detail that they knew doctrine, knew the basics, that's what helped them evolve TTPs outside of doctrine so fast, in my opinion, on the other side. It was those guys that knew the books. They knew how to go off of that and do something else to make it work. And I was always amazed by that, the way it went. So when you look at your time in the 75th in totality, and we could talk for hours on this, what comes to mind? What do you think back on often, or every once in a while you're driving by yourself and you have a chuckle? What was it about the 75th that stays with you every day?
Yeah, you're right. It could talk forever. I mean, I kind of told you like 3rd Battalion. Like I think a lot about, of course, the 1st Battalion days when we were together, right? Like I think at least for whatever reason, I always tell folks like we had like it was just like a really special time to me in Savannah. Like if you look at the leaders we had in place during that couple year window, right? It was a camaraderie that I don't know that I ever saw replicated. I mean, not that others were bad, but like the group was just so tight knit.
Yeah.
The hail and farewells, the Halloween parties, I mean, the city, like everything was just kind of amazing at that time frame. And you look at the NCOs and the officers that were there, the deployments that we had, and at least during that time frame, I'm pretty sure I got this right. Like we were pretty fortunate, like we had wounded, but we didn't have, the battalion did not have any killed in action until, when was it, maybe 2008? I'm gonna get
3rd Battalion was kind of taking the brunt of the KIAs at the time. Yeah.
And so I felt like we were very fortunate. We just had like this real tight knit bond during that time frame that always sticks with me. And then when you go out when I think of like 2nd Battalion, it's the same. Like the level of folks, different environment, but I always just go back to like, sometimes I'll walk around, right? Cause now that I'm removed, like I'll walk around and I'll see stuff like, this on the back, and I look and I'm like, man, how did I hang with these guys like this? Right. It's like, it's almost like, was that me? Like who was that? Like Major Taylor, like who was that guy? Yeah. Right. It's like, who was that guy? Or, Captain Taylor, who was that guy? And I think of like the professionalism and the people and the adherence to standards and just the brotherhood that lasts, in which we all know, or most people know, like you could not talk to somebody for years, but you see somebody, you connect, and you've got that lifelong brotherhood because of the mission and the sacrifice. When you think like the op tempo, right? Like you think about like, when people hear like the number of deployments I have, I'm like, man, that is nothing. I know guys who are like on 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, like the level of commitment that it takes to deploy and then come back, and being home is almost worse, right? Because you're like home, but you're not home. So there's expectations of you being home, but you're not, you're not home. And it's just all inspiring, to think, and, really like an honor to think of like, man, we did some really cool stuff with just some like amazing folks, right? And I think about like guys like you, and I was thinking about Jacobs the other day, because I think I probably saw something about Jacobs on LinkedIn. And I always crack up because I remember doing one op and Jacobs wanted to like go down the top of this building in this by himself, maybe one of their Ranger. I'm like, no, you're not doing that job. But just like, it's, sometimes like, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but it's like, how did I stand with guys like you? Because like where we're at as an officer, we have our role. But I mean, you guys are like kicking down doors. Like you were like in that breach, like day in, day out, hundreds and hundreds of raids, probably thousands for you by the time you get out. And it's just
Yeah.
like, man, like that's just a different level, right? Like
Right.
that's just a different level. And it's just it's humbling to have served with so many guys like you and others
Yeah.
for that time frame. And that's really kind of what I think about. It's like both being proud and then thinking, damn, man, who was that guy that hung with him at that point in time? It's just
Yeah.
it was a great time, man. There's just so many good people during that
Yeah.
that era of my life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's some of the greatest. I do the same thing. I look at pictures of stuff, and I just kind of like I don't recognize myself like it's like, man, I used to do that. I can't believe I was with these guys because and you've experienced. You see your former reports or subordinates now they've gone farther than you went or done
Yeah.
more and you're like, wow, that is so awesome to see and to think that we chewed the same dirt at the same time with some of those guys. And what it's moments, it's little moments like you talk about Josh, little things. And there's something that every time I think of you, there's a picture that comes to mind of you laying in the prone, re-enlisting a guy,
Yeah.
right?
After we did the remain over day.
Yeah, can you just what was that like? What's that feeling when you get to, somebody right there in that moment is saying, here I am, send me again, you know,
It,
and you're part of that.
that was, man, that is I see that picture often because I share a little story about that whole remain over day. And I think we did. That was crazy because as we weren't planning on it, we weren't really prepared for it. It's like, all right, you guys are just gonna stay over day, after the bad guys that we got are like flying off in a helicopter. We've got muffin tops and bottles of water, and it's just hot as hell, right? Like we're like, it's like here comes the bird, here goes out, and then we've got like, and we've given like how many batters did we get, Yuma? We got like
Right.
a shitload of batteries, a couple 16-ounce bottles of water, which were gone. Um, and then we get back out, and then we get ambushed, and then right after that, dude's like, "This is awesome! Like let's reenlist." And we had Dustin Blair, if you remember,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
sitting in the background. So he had his flag. So we had a flag in the background, and it's just it's like stuff like that. You're like, man, like I don't even know if you can like put words into it. Where it's like you go through the battle, and folks are like, yeah, I want to reenlist right here, right now. I want to keep doing this, right? And I think to me that it says a lot about like the folks that were working directly for those Rangers, right? Because they were setting conditions in which they're like, hey, I like the mission, but I think you've seen and I've seen throughout our military career, like folks will stay, soldiers, Rangers will stay if they like the folks they're working for.
Yep.
And I attributed that to the young leaders and squad leaders, platoon sergeants, platoon leaders that are like setting that condition where like you're looking at a young Ranger who's reenlistment on top of a roof after the firefight, and you're like, damn, man, like, yeah, that there's a reason why there's like that 1%, right? Like
Yeah.
that they're considered who they are, and it's just yeah, man, you're like taking me back to that moment of
Yeah.
it's
It's
pretty special when you think about it during that time frame. And then I think, of course, we got in trouble, right? Because we took our Mitches off to do
yeah.
the.
Didn't have
I'm like,
eyebrow on or some shit. Yeah.
yeah, and we're like, seriously, that's what we're talking about. Like, this is pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
We're re-listing on the target, but like, why do you guys have your helmets on? You're like,
The standard's the standard. That's right.
like,
That's
what
right.
are we
Yeah.
talking about?
Uh, um, like I said, we could talk about 75th and stories and everything we did on the deployments for hours, but we're going to move forward a little. So your last assignment, which I'm really curious about, was with the old guard. And I remember one of the moments in my life was seeing the changing, at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And it really moved me at like a midpoint in my career as, reaffirmed what I was doing in the military. Uh, I can't imagine being in that organization for a number of reasons. I don't have the discipline for it, for one. But to lead that, to see what you had to see, to bury soldiers, from across multiple conflicts, what's it like being there? Such hollowed ground.
Well, it was one of the most like honorable assignments I ever had in the Army. And that's not taken away from time in the Ranger Regiment. It is one of those where, throughout my career for officers who go to the conventional Army, assessed to go back to Ranger Regiment. Anytime you went to like the Human Resources Command website, it was always like the Old Guard and Ranger Regiment because you had to assess for both. And I was like, I want to go to Ranger Regiment. I want to go to Ranger Regiment. Never thought I'd end up at the Old Guard, but at that point, I'd gone through a divorce. I was back in Maryland. I was working at the Pentagon. I didn't want to leave my kids, so the options were kind of limited. So I was like, all right, I'll put the Old Guard. Didn't know what to expect really. And for those that don't know, there's 2 battalions in the Old Guard: 1st Battalion and 4th Battalion. 4th Battalion has the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Fife and Drum Corps. They have the stereotypical platoon that's got all like the 6'4" Old Guard soldiers. The rifle team, and then 1st Battalion, and I had 1st Battalion with Mike Callahan McCann, and we were responsible for all the funerals in Arlington for the military, for the Army, and then the caisson platoon had the joint services, so they would do funerals. They would execute funerals for joint services because they had the caisson. And I will tell you, man, that was because a lot of folks will say, "Is it hard?" There's got to be said. And I will say, like, the first time I presented a flag, I was like, just don't mess up the words. Like, just don't mess up the words. Like, don't mess up the words. It was, Arlington, you walk into Arlington and it's, man, there's no race, there's no religion, there's no right or wrong, there's no creed. Like, it doesn't matter. It's like you get in there and there's this peace that's over the entire place because it's about one simple act of like recognizing the fallen. The fallen service member, the family member, or the spouse. And man, it was one of those, my sergeant major and I, we had this saying where we would tell the Old Guard soldiers, which is like, hey, you're the last thing a family is going to see before they lay their loved ones to rest. Like, make it good. Right. And I would tell you, like you said, the discipline part, man, we rehearsed for things more times than we rehearsed for combat raids. It was, because you don't want a soldier falling out, folding the flag over the casket or an escort element. It was just such an honorable position. Like I never thought I'd ended up there, but it was like, and I didn't know it at the time that was basically going to be my last assignment. Like I didn't know that I was going to then make a decision to retire, but it was like a fitting end of service, going from conflict to like laying loved ones to rest. And I think, one of the really special things is when, remains were found from like World War II or Vietnam or Korea or whatever previous war. And then we receive them at like Reagan Airport, bring them back, and then they get interned in Arlington. It was like, that's when, like the commitment, like that ethos of like, hey, we're not going to leave somebody behind, and we'll bring you back, and we'll remember you. And it's just a really, really special place, man. And it is one of those, I think, when people think of going to the Old Guard, like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then you get there, you serve there, and you're like, man, that's one of those memories that will, is really, really impactful. It's a special place. Yeah. I consider myself lucky to have served there and in the Ranger Regiment for the majority of my military time.
Yeah, that's all. I can't imagine how, it's just, it's just one of those places, that, and I haven't been back there since, Matt Commons was killed. Cause it's hard for me to even think about walking on there. Cause, it's just one of those places that few people understand the way like we do, I think. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you're right. Like, it's almost like when I go back now, because I usually go back because my grandfather and uncle are buried there. So I got a pass so I can drive.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it's almost like it gets harder the older you get to kind of go back, right? Because I think particularly how you look at like how things wrapped up in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then you see names and you just sit there and it's like, how do you not get emotional with all these other thoughts of like, you're looking at this, someone you serve with that is buried there, and then you see family members that are, because we were working Memorial Day, Veterans Day. You'd always see family members camped out there with like birthday cakes, beer, like sitting around all day. And you're just like, Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I think it's hard now, just particularly like given how things ended up. It's hard to not have all these questions go through your head, which is probably a conversation for a completely
Yeah.
different time. But I also think they're buried in the presence of just a lot of heroes that really just shaped the country. When you kind of look at you look at the history that's in there in terms of the sacrifice that allowed us to be where we are today.
Yeah. So how many years total did you serve?
If you take all my reserve and guard time, 24 years.
So in all that service, the question I asked everybody was, what was your most challenging day in the uniform?
That was a hard one. So between that and the best day. So I don't know if it was a day, but it was a period. So after I left 3rd Battalion, I took command of a company in the conventional unit after we gotten back from the invasion in Iraq. And the day I took over, we listed a soldier as FTR, failure to report. Just standard. I was the day I took command. I was like, all right, failure to report. Followed the protocol. I guess 2 or 3 days later, listed him as AWOL, and didn't think much of it. I mean, failure report, AWOL. His dad had come down once, and we told him like, hey, we follow all the AWOL procedures, but we don't chase anybody down. And didn't really think anything of it. And then, God, it was probably 4 or 5 months later, whatever. My first sergeant, I came back. I think it was at the range. Came back, and the first sergeant was like, "Hey, sir, come on into the office." And we went into the office, and he told me some young private had overheard a couple other soldiers talking about the fact that they killed this guy.
Oh, geez.
Right. So come to find out, there were 3 soldiers within the company that had killed the soldier. Shortly after, I think there was a fight over some strip club aspect. I mean, it was horrible, right? And it was like that entire time. It's like I felt like I was more in bed with CID than anything else, because I mean, literally, I think everybody in the company had talked to CID at some point or fashion. And it was hard, right? Because it was hard to focus on other things when when something like that is occurring, and the guys going to trial. And, right when that was settling down on Christmas, we had a soldier that was killed in a car accident on the way home from leave, because he didn't have a seatbelt on. So we went to the memorial service, right? And it was just like, I was thinking, I'm like, man, this is not what I thought company command was going to be like. I didn't think it was going to be like this. And the company was pretty beat down at that point. Going from that to another thing. We had the memorial, and we came out, and the brigade commander, I'll just leave nameless, wanted to meet the company, and I was like, oh, okay, he's gonna like pep talk the company, right? He's gonna give the company kind of like, hey, hang in there, man. This guy just like proceeded to blame the company. Like, one of you all knew he didn't have his seatbelt on at some point, didn't say anything. And I just remember thinking, like, there are very few leaders that I just don't like.
Right.
He was one of them. Because I'm like, man, here's a company that has been through a lot. None of these soldiers had anything to do with, and it was more like cover your ass. Like, I remember my battalion commander at the time, like after it happened, what the first call was, Yuma, like, hey, did you brief them about wearing their seatbelts? I'm like, and I said this to him. I thought I might have gotten fired. I'm like, yeah, sir, I got the cover your ass letter right here. Right. Like, we had a soldier killed, and you're worried about, did he sign his name? Yeah, he signed his name that he was going to wear a seatbelt, and he didn't. It was disappointing. It was hard because, there was just a lot of hard times during that. And it was that, and I think particularly because when it comes to like losing soldiers, that's it. Right. Yeah. Versus, again, like we were kind of fortunate. We had wounded, but we didn't lose any Rangers. And I always thought, man, after dealing with like that, man, there's not going to be that much that's going to, and I always say, unless somebody was killed, it's probably not that big of a deal, because that was so impactful in my early life of having 2 soldiers, one killed, one died in a car accident.
Yeah.
And that was, man, that was that. And I think, on that part, I think the other tough part, was like the one day, like I think about the most was the last deployment. Didn't know this was going to be my last deployment at the time in Washington for 275. Is we were leaving for deployment, missing missing second Christmas in a row, and I love Christmas. So
Yeah.
my kids were, I think my daughter was 8, 9, my son was in probably 6, 7, and at this point, my daughter was old enough to remember, know what war was.
Right.
Like to know the risks. And I remember sitting at at the island table, telling him I was leaving, and like my son's reaction. And I know my son's was probably more as a response because he was a little bit younger, but my daughter kind of knew what war was. And I just remember driving away, like just punching the ceiling in my truck, the roof of the truck, just like, just the pain of that, those experiences of constantly leaving, and the pain, the pain like that we felt, but then like the pain we were actually leaving on our kids was always, I always thought was really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's tough. You said something earlier about how you learned, that, the sergeant major let you go for the football game and you learned from good leaders. As
Mm-hmm.
bad as that battalion commander was, you learned what not to do at that point. And I always tell people you can learn just as much about being a good leader from bad leadership if you remember the shit that they did and say, I'll never do that.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
you're absolutely right, man. It's like a couple of those things. Like, I mean, I'd say that about my biological father, right? I'm like, well, I don't have any relationship with him, but what he did teach me was what I don't want to do.
Yeah,
And what
absolutely.
I don't want to do. And you're right. Those commanders, I was like, well, I know exactly what I'm
Yep.
not going to do, or what I'm never going to, what I'm going to strive not to do
Yep.
in life anyway.
Yeah. So a lot of tough things happen in the military, losing friends, leaving family, but it's not all bad, right? Because we stuck
No,
around for 20 plus years, and some of the greatest memories, if
yeah,
not the
that
greatest
is
memories
true,
of my
man.
life, especially on a work side of life, are in the uniform. So, what was your best day? What you're not punching the ceiling, but you're laughing your ass
Yeah,
off in the truck when you're driving.
man. I mean, so that's like a lot of good days, right? And so I was thinking,
Yeah.
like, all right, what are good days? I think good days in a sense of like bringing everybody home, quote unquote, safely.
Yeah.
Those were always a really good days. I think with that, like on a personal level, like a day I was really proud was like the day we came back after like our first deployment as a company commander. Because prior to that, I was on staff, so you deploy, and you're like, all right, I got a CIB, but I was,
Right.
I don't want to say I was just a staff guy, but I was a staff guy. So you've earned it, but it's like, all right, but have you really kind of tested yourself? Like, have I really tested myself with the boys? So that was kind of a proud moment. Seeing young Rangers and soldiers just succeed,
Yeah.
like guys who would be at Ranger school for like just months and months and months. And then they come back. I mean, I think he was in Ranger school for like 9 months. I think when I was in third battalion. I mean, it was just there forever. Granger, I think was his name. There's two Grangers because
Oh, he's famous.
yeah, what I'm talking about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think he just lived there. Like I think he was only in my platoon, there for like just a couple of months.
Yep.
Um, my getting my and I talk about like soldiers succeeding. I remember you don't see often, but like you ever have like a soldier or a ranger who gets demoted because they got in trouble,
Yeah.
they lose rank. It's always proud, like when they make a choice and they choose to learn from it, and then they get promoted again.
Yep.
Those are always really great days. My kids, when I got to the old guard, actually seeing me in uniform for the first time,
Yeah.
because they never did, right? Because we'd come and go in civvies, and they didn't hang out, with what we did, and so those are always proud. I was proud serving with the Ranger Regiment every day, and I was proud, like in the old guard, and I would always try to do funerals on Friday because it was just a good feeling driving home, knowing like you just made an impact. So it's hard to say one really good day, but there are far more good days than I would say bad days in our lives. And you're right, like the stuff we laugh about, some people probably think we're crazy, but to us,
Absolutely.
it's kind of funny in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So after 24 years, you decide to hang up the uniform. transition to the other side, which is always, it's there's a lot of stuff that comes with that. But how was your transition, as a senior officer? Easier than you thought, harder than you thought? What are some things you learned, some misconceptions that are about it?
Yeah, I think I broke it down in like a couple of years, right? So the decision was kind of spontaneous. Like I really didn't know I was going to do it. So I relinquished command, and then I went and climbed my first mountain. And it was during that climb I made the decision to retire. Like that is when I made the decision to retire. And I was on orders to go to war college. I was like, no, this is family, where the kids are at in life. I'm like, I made that decision. And then, if I break it down kind of by years, because I know, we talk about like things that would be beneficial, like giving back in the process. Is like I had like a year after command to like really work on transition. Man, I wasted that year. It was so hard for me because we were so used to like doing something.
Right.
I had nothing. I went from battalion command to I was sitting up at Fort Meade, not doing a whole lot. And it's like I felt this massive guilt for not really doing anything. So like I really sucked at that first part of transition because I just felt bad. Like I'd sit around kind of doing nothing until like 3 or 4. I'm like, all right, well, most people are about done today. Now I'll go do something. I kind of wasted that year. And then, I think then it was like when it happened, it was like, it's almost like a vacation. You go like this first year, you're like, oh, I'm free. I always tell people like, you don't really know what freedom is until you're out of the military and you like, can really just, I would ask guys I work with like, hey man, can I go down to the NASCAR race in Richmond? I'm like, hey, why are you asking this? I'm like, I don't know, because that's like 2.5 hours away. And they're like, no, man, just go to the race, right? Like go to this race. And I think the second year probably is when like I started having a little more, I was having a harder time, right? I was adjusting like with like his identity of like, all right, who am I? What am I going to be? Like I almost took like all my military stuff down because it's like, all right, how do I identify as something different? Like I need to not be reminded of what I was because I'm like 44 at the time. Like what else do I want to do in my life? So I struggled with that part. And I think, I don't know if it was harder or easier, right? Like I think it was harder than I thought, but to me, it was the psychological aspect of the shift in which I think transition gets wrong, right? Like I think, we're very indoctrinated going into the military, and as we should be, right? We are kind of broke down in a psychological manner and brought up for the specific reason to do the specific job. And that's the right thing. But there's no de-indoctrinating us when we make this shift.
Right.
And I found that to be difficult, right? Like I found that to be like a difficult proposition and like figuring out, all right, who am I? How do I make this? How do I fit into this role in life? And it wasn't until I went back to graduate school that I think the shift really started helping me out a little bit. I still think it's always a struggle, but it tapers off over time as you get more and more comfortable with the certain aspects of life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a process for sure. I'm only about 2 years removed, and I'm still, I'm still transitioning, and I think I will be for a while. And that's okay, I think.
Yeah, no, I really think it is, right? Because you got to get comfortable. Like, I mean, it's been like 6 years, and I'm finally getting comfortable with like my military life. Obviously, is significant because it was a lot of chunk of my life, but I got a lot of life left. How do I balance it the right way? So, I'm not just remembered as this guy in the, people used to, when I was people would just call me Ranger Dave, which is great. But then it's like your identity just gets fixated on that. Yeah. And I'm like, hey, well, there's a lot more to me than just that. So how do you have this, how do you have a balance of life to move forward if that's what you choose you want to do?
Yep, absolutely. So if you're going to give somebody, especially senior leaders who spent 20 years or more in the military, what advice would you give them? Is it don't work until the day you exit? Is it step back, gain some perspective? What's something that maybe you did or wish you would have done during your transition process?
Well, I think it's a couple things. And I tell anybody this, whether it's a senior officer or not. I think one, if I'm coming from an aspect of like retiring, so we have we are at least gifted or have earned the ability to, like, or we've got a little bit of a financial buffer. That's
Right.
one aspect.
Right.
I think the most important thing is, like, you have to know your values. Like, that is the number one thing, in my opinion. Because people would ask me, like, Dave, what do you want to do when you retire? I'm like, I just want to go to NASCAR races and climb mountains. Like, that's all I want to do. I'm like, I don't know, right? And people are like, well, go network, go do all these things. And I'm like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And, I did this exercise through a couple nonprofit organizations, and one was about understanding your values. And that was the first time in my life where I sat down and I was like, all right, well, what are my values? Not the Army leadership values that they hope let into you by, putting it on your dog tags, but like, or the Ranger Creed, but like, what are like my own personal values? And at the time I couldn't list them, right? And this executive coach I went through, she's like, Dave, what are your values? And she sends me a list of like 71 things. I'm like, all of them? Like, all of them are? And I spent time like really figuring out, like, all right, what are my values? And that became my guide. That was like my compass. That was like my North Star of, like, all right, I'm only going to look at things that allow me to adhere to the values. And if I make decisions on that, then it'll be good. I have to be comfortable with that. That would be one. Chase happiness. What I mean by that is chase happiness, not money, because it likely won't end well. And I see a lot of folks chasing money or a title, right? Because they believe, oh, well, you're a battalion commander, you should command this salary, or you're going to go work for this place, or you're a senior non-commissioned officer and you should go do these things. And I think people chase titles because it's like this, hey, what are you doing when you get out? Oh, well, I'm this executive at this or that, to kind of feel like you're self-validating maybe, versus, hey man, do what the hell you want to do. Like, you've earned that right. Like, chase happiness. Like, be comfortable with whatever job you're taking. Like, when I got out of Yuma, and JD, right? Like, JD is, so I'm getting out, I'm working for JD, who's like 13, 14 years younger. I have 13. I don't want to make him too young. 13 years younger than me, right? But I'm going from battalion commander to there's like a handful of us trying to figure out how to run a business. And you would tell people that, and I remember distinctly, like, people just kind of looking at me like, because I didn't say I was like a JP Morgan or something. Right. So I think folks got to be comfortable with, like, what do you want to do? Like, what makes you happy? Screw everybody else. Like, what makes you happy that aligns with your values? And then on the chasing money part, what I think sometimes the transition gets wrong is it's like, hey, you should command this much money. And I think if you align your values, what your values are. If you're like retiring, you take the money that you're going to get from retirement and say, okay, what is my standard of living? Can I do another job that may pay me less, but aligns with my values, that keeps my total standard of living the same, and then go with that? And I think in the long run, you'll be happier. That's my view, but it was a hard process. But those things to me are important. Is that getting comfortable, like, what's really important to you, and aligning your jobs up with those.
Yeah. I'm going to say right now, if you're listening to this or you're watching this, rewind 3 minutes and listen to everything that Dave just said one more time, because that's so on point. Because I did the same thing. Like, some executive coach said, what are your values? You need to align your next life off of your values. I Googled what are values, because I only knew what the Army told me my values were, and I had like a similar list of like 30 things on it, and I had to whittle it down because I was like, I want to be all of these things. The last thing I'll say about that is, we're talking about military. I think it transcends military.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
If you're unhappy in life, and we all talk to that buddy that we call and we go, hey, how's it going? And they go, it's going. If you're that person, stop right now and list your values, write them down, and see where you're at. Because chase happiness, be happy. Life's too short to be miserable and unhappy. I believe that, and I'll leave it at that. But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on so many things there. But now you do have a CEO in front of you, and that's because you were able to take that step back, I think, and be humble yourself and work back up. So CEO of leadership, LDR leadership, in the leadership space. What are you doing? What is it? What it's all about?
Yeah, so it really is fascinating. We talk about the values. The reason we ended up there is got connected to JD through, I'd gone through the Station Foundation and Commit Foundation, and Anne Marie Craig sent like JD and I this note. It's like, hey, you guys ought to meet. And I'm like, Anne Marie, can you give me like some insight on what this is about? And JD and I sat down and met, and really what connected was like our values really kind of aligned. Like he was going down to Texas to do some Hurricane Harvey recovery. I was going down with Team Rubicon to do Hurricane Harvey recovery separately. And we just kind of, we ended up linking up, and, that was it. That was the driving factor of how that started. And LDR leadership didn't even exist at that time. I came on as like a 1099 contractor. Basically they kind of made up some job, I think, just to, we're like, all right, let's just take a risk on this. And then it has evolved over the years from LDR leadership became a company in 2018 that I've been running and trying to grow and scale. And it's an evidence-based leadership program with our mission really is inspiring people to be the best. So when, someone asks like, hey, what is leadership? I mean, you can Google it, right? And get like a million or a billion results. And I think really at the end of the day, it's like, hey, what can you do to inspire people to be the best? And what I was always or at least I still try to be very thoughtful of, and me and my COO and partner, Vern Tubbs, always talk about is like, it's an evidence-based approach, meaning like this isn't designed based off the military. It's like, hey, what is the evidence-based approach? That was the premise of going back to school. It's like, hey, we did a lot of leading, right? You and I did a lot of leading in the Army. I was like, all right, well, what is the science behind some of this make? And so we built a curriculum around, a team effectiveness model and a performance management training system that, first time I ever saw this, I was like, man, I wish I had that in the Army, right? Because I think the military does a good job of putting people in leadership positions. I think there's an opportunity to like, how do we actually manage people versus, hey man, you suck. Go paint rocks or cut grass with scissors, right? And get better. So we really kind of try to focus on mastering the basics, like, hey, what are the basics when we're getting somebody who's going from a technical competency to a leadership or management position. Now let's train them on the basics of leadership skills, how to manage people, communication skills, emotional intelligence. It's just really been a fun thing. And, you and I were talking about this, before the podcast. I think trying to grow a business is like harder than combat in some ways, man. I mean, it's like, I told you ahead of time, like I've lost more sleep. I've been up earlier in the mornings doing this than I ever was in the military, but it's rewarding because you're kind of creating and building and learning something new with just a great group of people.
Yeah, it's funny how you say, you led in the military for 20 some odd years. You're in the leadership space now. Everybody talks about leadership. You get on LinkedIn, it's all about leadership. But how often do you really sit down and talk, like talk about emotional intelligence? Like, it's one thing to Google it, but after you Google it, are you having discussions about it and really peeling the onions back and doing that? And I think that's where leadership is really cultivated. Other than just the posts and the stuff that's out there. But so your leadership style, how has it had to change in the civilian world? I just had a conversation with somebody this morning. There was like, I just got told my emails are too direct and I'm an asshole, in the civilian space. And he's like, I'm just telling them, direct. I'm just trying to be bluff, bottom line up front and get move on. So how have you had to evolve that on the other side of uniform?
Yeah, it is. It's a true statement. It's not right or wrong. It's different, right? It's different. And I believe, at least, being on the outside of it for 6 years now, like the folks, I think, maybe generalize, and generalizing is always, not the best thing, but like the military does not have the corner on leadership. we have a lot of great leaders, and we get put in a position to lead a lot. I, to an extent, sometimes think like leading outside of the military is harder.
Absolutely.
You know, take our whole life, you know, in Alpha Company 175, like everybody wanted to be there. Everybody knew they could be fired at a moment's notice. So everybody was showing up with their A game, at the worst their B game. That doesn't happen in the corporate world, right? And it's so you've got to manage folks around. You know, sometimes you got to meet them where they need to be met, because it's just a different thing. And I remember very specifically once I started realizing I had to change my leadership style. Fortunately, I consider still a friend. She no longer works with us. She's moved on to bigger and better pastures, but she's like like she's younger, and I will hit her up because she's closer to my daughter's age. So I'll be like, hey, what are some things I can get for my daughter for Christmas at this age? And she's like nailed every one of them. She's like, right. I think she would love these. She would love these. Well, there was this time, I don't know, man, it might have been like 2 years after I was out, and we were having a conversation with me, her, and one of the partners. And I felt like she was undercutting me, saying things that were like, you know, my authority.
Right.
And so he left, and I was like, all right, we're going to fix this. I was like, all right, we'll just close the door. There was a window, right? So it wasn't like we were going to just close the door by ourselves. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to her. I'm like, all right, look, we got to do this. Like, if I'm saying this, we got to get after this, and we've got to keep going. We got to keep moving. We're like, that would have been great in our old life, right? Like, that's the style. I mean, she thought I was like yelling at her like her father. And I was like, oh my God. And it was like at that point, I realized what works in one area doesn't work in another area. And you've got to figure out a little bit more around what motivates people, right? If it's an intrinsic motivator, an extrinsic motivator, like how can you lead people that, you know, some people just want to show up, do their job and leave. And that's fine. There's definitely attributes that we can transition over, but there are some that are not, right? Like, you know, it's like that whole, like, hey, you're that 1%. Okay, well, guess what? Now you're operating in the 99%. So it's on us to figure out how to work within that 99%, because leadership styles, I think, are different. So I think you've got to take some, but you got to find some. And you're right, your emails are just too blunt. Well, that may work, but not everybody is signing up to be just that blunt response.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting kind of transition to figure out like what works, that worked really well, but is not going to translate over into the corporate world. That is certainly for sure. And then of course, you know, running a business, I've got no staff. So like, you know, my PowerPoint days are not over.
Oh, that's funny. And that transition from the military and your leadership, I find that just as a dad, like sometimes my tone and the way I approach things with my wife and my kids, I go like, okay, he's 15 years old, but he's not one of my privates, which is a conversation that my wife had to remind me of this morning. You know, it's just, I think we're so mission focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was life and death, literally, for 20 plus years, that it's hard to sometimes turn that off, right? It's really difficult.
It is. And I mean, I had, or I was told at one point, like, hey, the kids are not, you know, they're not your Rangers, you're not your soldiers. And you don't mean it. Like, we don't mean it wrong. But then, like you said, you take a step back and you're like, okay, that's, you know, and I started the way I would equate things, you know, how I evolved, like my relationship with the kids is like, before I would say something to them, I would think if I was them, or if it was something that was said to me, would I like it? And if the answer is no, you know, it's like, all right, how do I not project certain things down to them, or, you know, carry them over to something? Yeah. But you're right. I mean, even with the kids, it's different. They didn't sign up to be Rangers or, you know, someone in the Army. That's a great point.
So when I talk to people that are transitioning or maybe struggling with the transition, I always ask them kind of like, what are your hobbies? What do you do outside of your job, outside of being a dad, a husband? I think you have to have something, right? I do the podcast. I do some fundraising and play Call of Duty. And that's kind of, you know, I do some things like that. I get out, I go deer hunting. I do stuff that's kind of just for me to help me reconnect with nature and some self care. You're alumni West Virginia, a mountaineer. I see the picture of the mountains in the background. I love what you do. You get out there, you climb the mountains and post things. And I think you have probably some introspective moments when you're up there climbing, doing all that. Why do you do it? Why is it climbing? What does it do for you? Is it mentally, physically, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think, the back up one on what you said about the hobbies, Yuma, I think, if you'd have probably asked you or I in the Savannah days what our hobbies were, we'd probably like, oh, work out.
Yeah.
Or like, that's a hobby. And I think to me, that's like a red flag. If someone says like, hey, work out, like that's not a hobby. That's like a lifestyle.
Right.
Because I don't think I had a lot of hobbies. I thought I did, but I don't think I did. And I discovered climbing in 2016, right? So like I didn't go on my first solo trip until like 2014 to Zion National Park. I climbed my first mountain in 2016. I said earlier, like that's when I made a decision to retire from the Army. And man, it was like after that, it just drew me. Like that's, the mountains are calling. It's like calling me all the time. That's the Northern Cascades behind me. That's like been my playground for the last few years. And people ask like, hey, well, why do you do it? And I think you nail it on a couple areas. It's like, where can I go to like physically and mentally challenge myself, right? So when I was climbing Mount Shasta, it was an eye opener for me because I wasn't worried about avalanches or crevasses or rockfall or icefall. I was worried about failing, right? Like, I mean, the fear of failure was like, if I don't make it to the summit, I got to tell people I didn't make this thing.
Yeah.
And that scared me more than anything else. And now I go, man, it is the one place where I find I can go and there's just like a singular focus in life, right? Like there's no cell phone connectivity. It is like your partner, you're on a rock, you're on a mountain just by yourself. Because where me and my buddy, Eric Shaw try to go is like these remote places where we're not going to see anybody, right? Which is like he and I, and you can't help but be reflective. At least I don't think you can just help but be reflective because in today's society where you're connected like 24/7, like it's so hard to like just be forced to shut off and just be left with your own thoughts. And, one, it's always good because I've reframed my approach now. If I don't summit everything, it's not a failure. It's like, hey, we made a good decision. Like, okay, we didn't make it. Probably a good decision for whatever reason. And it's like, I'll go there and I'll leave things that I don't want in my life in the mountains, right? Like, yep, I don't need that. That's not healthy. And then I always come back with like, what do I want to do better in my life? Like, what do I need to change? What changes do I want to make? And it's just, I just feel alive, man. I feel alive. I feel at peace. And people are like, well, someone tell me like, well, man, you've worked through a lot of stuff in your life already, man. Why do you want to kill yourself? I'm like, I'm not trying to kill myself. Like I'm living. Like this is living. I'm like, every day we wake up, we're one day closer to dying.
Yep.
I'm like, I think climbing for me makes me a better person, a better leader, a better entrepreneur, CEO, and a better father. That's what to me it does for me. It's just one of those. And there's certain parts where I'm like, I just feel I'm like, I gotta go. Like I gotta go climb. Like I gotta get out into the wilderness. And it's like I talk for about climbing. I talk for about everything really. We were in Washington State this year. My buddy and I, this is our third attempt in climbing the northeast buttress of Goodney Mountain. The two previous years we got turned around because of like weather or conditions. Last year, it's kind of funny. I woke up and I looked at him like, Eric, man, I feel like you just put me through Ranger School again. I mean, we were well, you'll get this, but we took this a different approach. So we were bushwhacking. We bushwhacked for 6 hours and we covered only like a mile and a half.
Oh,
it was brutal. But we went back this year and we summited. After like a 12-hour day, we got there right before the sun goes down, and like it was just me and him in the Northern Cascades. The sun is going down, the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. It's like you look around and you're like, There's nobody else in the world that is looking at this view in this moment in time. And you feel both powerful, but you feel small
Yeah.
at the same time. And you're like, I don't know what's out there in the world, but there's got to be something bigger than me out there. And it's just a kind of powerful, spiritual, reflective kind of moment out there. And that's why I do it. That's the draw to me. And so it is funny going to West Virginia, but I didn't even think about climbing mountains when I was at West Virginia. But the Mountaineer mascot is kind of run true over time.
Yeah. And I'll say this about climbing mountains. So I'm from New Mexico, grew up in the Rocky Mountains, 8,000 feet elevations, where the ranch set, mountains all around. You don't have to go climb, Rainier or go to Oregon and climb in the Cascades to climb a mountain. I make it a point every time my family, we go back to New Mexico, we go climb one of the mountains that's right there. I push my daughter up the hill. I push the kids up the hill. And you're right. There's just something about it when you get to the top and I can look at my kids and I can say, there's a chance that nobody's ever stood right here in this, in this desolate high desert. And the looks on my kids' faces and the accomplishment that they feel and just breathing the fresh air and the blue sky. It's something, that's something that they look forward to now when we go out there. And I challenge all veterans and just people, find your mountain that you can do with yourself or with your family, because it's cathartic and it's an amazing thing, and nature heals. I truly believe that.
I believe it's like life too, Yuma.
Yeah, absolutely.
You spend time, you're looking down, and then you just stop and look back and you see how far you've come.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to put one foot in front of the other until you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last question that I ask everybody. So back in that time machine, if you could go back and give Lieutenant Taylor some advice, what would it be?
It would absolutely be, I wish I was as self-aware as I believe I am now back then. Like, be a little more self-aware, have a higher level of emotional intelligence. Like, I wish I could go back and do that. I wish I could go back and lead with how I feel I am with the emotional intelligence and self-awareness, being more presence. I like that version of me now where I think I can be reflective about things and more readily when I screw something up, be more present, more understanding, have more empathy around folks.
Yeah.
And then, really trying to find a balance. Like, what I thought was balance was not balance. Right. And it's kind of hard because it's like, if I could go back, I would do that. But if I didn't experience all those things in life, would I be, or would we be where we are today if we didn't take that?
Yeah.
If we didn't take that path in life to get to where we are. So it's interesting. I always think about things like, I think it's probably just natural. We get older, like, damn, I wish I could go back and do that all over again.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's simple things for me. Like, I wish I would have read more books when I was, like 19 or 20, some of the the 5 habits of, the 7 habits of highly effective. I wish I would have read that as a team leader. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know I can't do that, but I hope that somebody's listening and says, hey, I'm going to check that out, who's 19 or 20 years old, and it changes their whole leader mindset from here on out. Right. So,
man, you nailed it. I think
that's the point of it.
Yeah. Like, how do you go? Like, you're right. Like, God, I wish I would have, if I'd have known, if I was a better student of like understanding teams and team design, how could that have impacted? And, we're young and we're like, we got all these answers. But I've always been impressed with folks who are just these consummate readers.
I know.
And they just read these books. I'm like, man, I read like 10 pages. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready for that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank goodness for audiobooks and podcasts.
Well, Dave, appreciate the time. From one service member to another retired guy, thank you for your service. Thanks for taking a minute with us and sharing your story with the listeners. And if you're out there listening, do the like, share, and subscribe. I'm at 480 subscribers on YouTube. Get me to 500. That's the goal. And then I can, some stuff kind of changes on the YouTube algorithm there. So help me out. Appreciate it. Dave, thanks again. Love you, brother. And we'll catch you all on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks, Yuma. And hey, if you still recording, Yuma, because you need to add this in there, man. I really appreciate what you're doing, man. It's there's, for particularly in the soft community, the Ranger community, like, it takes leaders and senior leaders like you to get out and show the vulnerability aspect is actually okay and makes you a stronger person. So I really appreciated what you've been doing and following the folks you've had on, man. It's been an honor and pleasure.
I appreciate that. I'll edit that out though.
Yeah, the typical, I'm not keeping that in there. I don't want anybody to tell me I'm doing good stuff.